"Why is a man like you always alone?" Claire Bennett asked, and for the first time that evening, Ethan Walker looked as though someone had reached past his quiet smile and touched the one place he kept locked away. The ballroom of the Bennett Grand shimmered 40 floors above downtown Chicago, wrapped in amber light and floor-to-ceiling glass. Crystal glasses chimed. A jazz trio played softly near the dance floor. Hundreds of guests moved beneath chandeliers in tailored suits and evening gowns, trading handshakes worth millions of dollars. Yet Ethan sat alone near the edge of the room, wearing a charcoal suit that was several years old and a wedding ring that should have raised a question Claire suddenly regretted asking. "You don't have to answer," she said. Ethan gave a small smile. "No, it's okay." He turned the ring once around his finger. Claire waited. She was 36, CEO of Bennett Hospitality Group, a woman accustomed to answers arriving before she finished asking for them. Employees straightened when she entered elevators. Investors returned her calls within minutes. Entire conference rooms became quiet when she lifted a hand. But Ethan wasn't impressed by power, and somehow that made his silence feel heavier than anyone else's words. "I'm not afraid of being alone," he finally said. Claire studied him. "Then what are you afraid of?" Ethan looked through the glass toward the city lights nearly 500 feet below. For several seconds, he said nothing. The trumpet softened behind them. Laughter drifted across the ballroom and disappeared into the music. Then Ethan spoke. "My daughter has already buried one mother." Claire's expression changed. Ethan's voice remained steady, almost gentle. "She's 8 years old. She knows what an empty chair at the dinner table looks like. She knows what it means when someone promises they'll always be there, and life doesn't let them keep that promise." Claire lowered her glass. "Ethan, so I'm careful." He looked at her now. No anger, no self-pity, just the quiet dignity of a father who had spent years carrying something heavier than loneliness. "I won't bring someone into Sophie's life just because I'm tired of coming home to an empty side of the bed. If she ever trusts someone enough to love them like family, I need to believe that person understands what staying means." Claire had negotiated acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without losing her composure. She had faced hostile boards, ruthless competitors, and reporters waiting for one careless sentence. But she had no answer for this. Ethan glanced toward the dance floor and gave the faintest smile. "So I guess that's why I'm alone." Claire stared at him, speechless, because she was beginning to understand that the man sitting beside her wasn't waiting for someone beautiful, wealthy, or impressive. He was waiting for someone who wouldn't leave. And what Ethan didn't know was that Claire Bennett had spent her entire adult life mastering almost everything except how to stay. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Walker was not wearing a charcoal suit beneath crystal chandeliers. He was kneeling beside an open elevator control panel in the service corridor of the Bennett Grand, holding a flashlight between his teeth while an impatient radio crackled beside his toolbox. It was 6:45 in the morning. Chicago was still gray beyond the lobby windows, and the hotel smelled of fresh coffee, polished marble, and the faint lemon cleaner the overnight crew used before sunrise. Ethan preferred this hour. No executives, no crowds, no one asking him to be anything except useful. "Maintenance, we have another elevator issue near the east lobby." Ethan picked up the radio. "I'm already on it. There is a guest inside. Is she okay?" "She says she is." Ethan stood immediately. That answer bothered him. People who were truly fine rarely needed to say it twice. He walked quickly toward the east elevators, his work boots clicking against marble that reflected the pale morning light. Inside the stalled car, Claire Bennett stared at the glowing floor indicator and tried not to look annoyed. She wore a simple navy coat over a cream blouse, her blonde hair pulled back loosely, with no assistant, no security, and nothing that announced she was the chief executive officer of the company whose name appeared above the entrance. She had arrived unannounced for an inspection because Claire believed people behaved differently when they knew the boss was coming. She was right. "Ma'am," Ethan called through the doors. "Can you hear me?" "Clearly." "Good. Are you feeling dizzy or short of breath?" "No." "Then we are doing better than the elevator." Claire almost smiled. "That is reassuring." It was supposed to be. Ethan worked without hurry, but without wasted movement. Metal clicked softly. The ventilation system hummed overhead. Less than 10 minutes later, the doors opened, and Claire stepped into the corridor expecting apologies, nervous explanations, perhaps someone recognizing her, and suddenly standing straighter. Ethan simply offered his hand to steady her across the narrow gap. "Watch your step." She accepted it. "Thank you. You are welcome." Then he turned back toward the panel. Claire remained there. "That is it." Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "Was there something else?" "You do not know who I am." He studied her for a second, not rudely, just honestly. "Should I?" Claire blinked. Nobody at Bennett Hospitality spoke to her that way. Not because his tone lacked respect, because it contained no fear. "Claire Bennett," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Ethan Walker." No sudden apology came. No nervous smile. He simply returned his flashlight to the toolbox. "Well, Miss Bennett, I am glad you are all right." She watched him walk away, pushing his cart toward another problem waiting somewhere beyond the lobby. 10 minutes later, Claire entered the executive conference room and found 12 department heads already standing. Every chair straightened. Every conversation stopped. Yet her mind remained downstairs with the maintenance worker who had looked at one of the most powerful women in the building and seen only a person trapped in an elevator. For reasons Claire could not yet explain, that quiet dignity stayed with her long after everyone else had remembered exactly who she was. Over the next several days, Claire found herself noticing Ethan in places where she had never noticed maintenance workers before. He was there before sunrise replacing a faulty thermostat in the conference wing, there after lunch helping an elderly guest understand the confusing controls on a new coffee machine, and there near the loading dock late one afternoon carrying a box for a housekeeper whose hands were already full. He never seemed hurried, even when he clearly was. He never announced what he had done. He simply solved the problem and moved on. On Thursday, Claire stepped out of a meeting shortly after 2 in the afternoon and heard voices near the employee dining room. "I can pay you back Friday," a young server named Noah Parker said quietly. "You do not owe me anything," Ethan replied. "Ethan, seriously." "Seriously, eat." Claire stopped before turning the corner. Noah stood beside a vending machine, holding a paper bag Ethan had handed him. His face was red with embarrassment. "My rent went up," Noah explained. "Then my car needed a new alternator. I thought I could stretch $20 until payday." Ethan leaned against his tool cart. "I have stretched $20 before. It does not stretch as far as people think." Noah looked into the bag. "This is your lunch." It was. "Then what are you eating?" Ethan considered the question with exaggerated seriousness. "There is a banana in my toolbox." Noah laughed despite himself. "That is not lunch. It is if you respect the banana." Claire nearly smiled. Noah finally accepted the food. Ethan did not pat him on the shoulder or offer some speech about generosity. He only said, "Friday comes faster when you are not hungry," then pushed his cart away. Claire stepped back before he saw her. Something about the moment unsettled her, not because it was extraordinary, but because Ethan had no audience. No cameras. No advantage. No reason to perform kindness. Later that afternoon, Claire found him replacing a light fixture near the hotel library. "Mr. Walker." Ethan looked down from the ladder. "Miss Bennett, do you always give away your lunch?" He paused. "You heard that." "I did." "Then Noah probably wishes you had not." Claire folded her arms. "You could have sent him to Human Resources." "He needed lunch today?" "Human Resources has forms." She studied him. "You make everything sound simple." Ethan climbed down and closed his toolbox. Most things are simple before people with expensive offices start discussing them. Claire stared at him. Ethan froze for half a second. That sounded better in my head. To his surprise, she laughed. Not the controlled laugh she used at investor dinners, but something warmer. "I will pretend I did not hear it. I would appreciate that." He started to leave. "Ethan." He turned. "Why did you help him?" Ethan glanced toward the dining room, then back at her. "Because I knew what he needed, and I had it. That is all. Should there be more?" Claire had no answer. She had spent years surrounded by people who treated favors like investments, generosity like publicity, and relationships like negotiations. Ethan Walker had given away his lunch because another man was hungry. Nothing promised. Nothing gained. And as Claire watched him disappear around the corner, she realized the man who asked for nothing was becoming the one person in the entire hotel she wanted to understand. Claire met Sophie Walker on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and the 8-year-old managed to tell her more about Ethan in 5 minutes than the entire hotel had in 5 years. School had dismissed early because of a teacher training day, and Ethan's usual neighbor could not pick Sophie up. so she sat quietly in the employee lounge while her father finished an emergency repair upstairs. Claire noticed her through the open doorway. The girl had pale blonde hair tied into a loose ponytail, a purple backpack beside her chair, and 3 colored pencils spread across a sheet of paper. She was drawing the Chicago skyline with serious concentration. "That is a very tall building," Claire said. Sophie looked up. "It is this hotel." "I thought so. I made it taller." Claire smiled. "Why?" Sophie considered the question. "Because Dad works here. It should be important." Something about the answer stopped Claire for a moment. She stepped inside. "I am Claire. Sophie Walker." The girl offered her hand with surprising formality. Claire shook it. "Your father taught you that. He says you should look people in the eye when you meet them." Sophie studied Claire's face. "Do you work here too?" "I do." "What do you do?" Claire almost laughed. "I run the company that owns the hotel." Sophie's eyes widened. "So you are my dad's boss?" "Technically." Sophie immediately became serious. "Then please do not make him work late tonight." Claire blinked. "Why?" "Tuesday is grilled cheese night." The simplicity of it softened something inside her. "That sounds important." "It is. He cuts mine diagonally because Mom used to." The room seemed to grow quieter. Rain tapped gently against the narrow window. Somewhere beyond the door, a service cart rolled across tile and an elevator bell chimed. Claire looked at Sophie's drawing again. There were 3 figures standing beneath the hotel, but one had been colored lightly, almost like a memory. "Is that your mother?" she asked gently. Sophie nodded. Her name was Rachel. Claire chose her next words carefully. "She looks beautiful." "She was." Sophie said it without hesitation. Then her small fingers returned to the purple pencil. "She died when I was 5. Claire felt the weight of the sentence precisely because Sophie did not dramatize it. Children sometimes carried grief differently. Not in speeches. In routines. In grilled cheese cut diagonally. In pictures where someone was still included even after they were gone. "I am sorry," Claire said. Sophie nodded. "Dad says being sad means somebody mattered." Claire swallowed. "Your dad sounds pretty wise." "Sometimes." Sophie leaned closer, as if sharing confidential information. "He also burns pancakes." Claire laughed softly. At that moment, Ethan appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, his sleeves rolled above his wrists. "Sophie, sorry. The repair took longer than I thought." Then he saw Claire. "Miss Bennett, your daughter has been explaining your culinary weaknesses." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "I see." Sophie packed her pencils away, then looked directly at Claire. "You can come for grilled cheese sometime." Ethan froze. Claire did too. Sophie lifted her backpack. "Dad does not invite people over much." Ethan reached for her coat. "All right, kiddo." But Sophie was not finished. She looked at Claire with the plain honesty only a child could carry. "He thinks he has to do everything alone." Ethan's hand stopped on the zipper. The rain continued against the window, soft and steady, and Claire suddenly understood that behind Ethan's quiet strength was not a man who needed rescuing, but a father who had forgotten that strength could also mean letting someone stay. 2 evenings after meeting Sophie, Claire found herself thinking about a chair she had never seen. It happened during dinner at a private restaurant overlooking the Chicago River, where 3 investors discussed expansion plans and projected revenue, while Claire stared at an untouched plate and remembered a little girl saying her father thought he had to do everything alone. By Friday afternoon, Claire had convinced herself that her curiosity was professional. Ethan was dependable. Employees trusted him. Guests remembered him. Understanding people like Ethan was useful when you ran a hospitality company. At least that was what she told herself until she found him in the hotel library repairing a loose cabinet hinge and asked, "How is Sophie?" Ethan looked up, surprised. "She is good. She has decided you are officially invited to grilled cheese night." "That sounds serious." "Very. There may be paperwork." Claire smiled, but her eyes drifted toward his wedding ring. Ethan noticed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he closed his toolbox and sat on the edge of a nearby chair. Her name was Rachel. Claire did not pretend not to understand. "Sophie's mother." Ethan nodded. "We met when we were 23. She worked at a bookstore, and I kept buying books I did not need because I wanted an excuse to talk to her." "Did it work?" "Eventually. Cost me about $80 first." Claire laughed softly. Ethan smiled at the memory, but it carried a tenderness that made her chest tighten. "She died 3 years ago after an illness," he said. "Sophie was 5. Claire lowered her voice. "I am sorry." "Thank you." There was no bitterness in him, only a sadness that had learned how to live beside gratitude. The hardest part was not the funeral or the paperwork. It was all the ordinary things afterward. One coffee mug, instead of two. One toothbrush by the sink. Sophie's school sending home a Mother's Day project. Claire listened without interrupting. Ethan looked toward the tall windows where late afternoon sunlight stretched across the carpet. For months, I kept Rachel's chair at the table exactly where it had always been. Sophie would look at it during dinner. I finally realized I was teaching her to wait for someone who could not come home. So you moved it? Claire asked. Across the room. He smiled faintly. Could not throw it away. Claire understood more than she wanted to admit. Her own penthouse was filled with expensive furniture she had never attached a memory to. Ethan had one ordinary chair he could not let go. Do you ever think about starting over? She asked. Ethan was quiet. Starting over makes it sound like what came before should be erased. Then maybe starting again. He looked at her, and something in the room changed. Sometimes. Claire held his gaze. What stops you? Ethan glanced at the ring. Sophie. She seems like she wants you to be happy. She does. That is exactly why I have to be careful. His voice softened. Adults can survive disappointment. Children turn it into questions about themselves. Claire felt those words settle somewhere deep. Ethan stood and picked up his toolbox. I can be lonely, Miss Bennett. That will not hurt Sophie. Choosing the wrong person might. Then he walked toward the door, leaving Claire beside the afternoon light and the uncomfortable realization that she had spent years judging relationships by what they could add to her life, while Ethan judged them by what they might cost his daughter. The following Monday, the Bennett Grand was preparing for its largest charity gala of the year when a problem surfaced that could have embarrassed the hotel in front of nearly 400 guests. The ballroom climate system began pushing warm air into a room already crowded with lighting equipment, floral displays, catering stations, and technicians preparing for the evening. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 78 degrees. Call the contractor, one manager said. They cannot arrive for 3 hours. Another replied. The guests arrive in 5. Claire stood beneath the chandeliers while department heads spoke over one another. Then Ethan walked in carrying his toolbox. He listened for 30 seconds, looked toward the ceiling vents, and asked one question. Who changed the ballroom programming this morning? Silence answered him. Ethan climbed to the mechanical level and found that a newly installed control module had been configured incorrectly during an overnight update. He could have blamed the outside contractor. He could have blamed management. Instead, he corrected the settings, tested the system, and stayed until cool air began flowing steadily through every vent. By 3:30, the ballroom was back to 71 degrees. Claire found him near the service entrance wiping dust from his hands. You saved us from a very uncomfortable evening. Ethan smiled. I fixed a thermostat. A thermostat connected to a room full of donors. Still a thermostat. Claire studied him. Come tonight. Ethan looked confused. I am working tonight. Not as maintenance. As my guest. His expression changed immediately. Miss Bennett, I appreciate it, but I do not belong at that kind of event. You belong in any room where your work matters. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom. That is a dangerous thing to tell a maintenance man. 7 o'clock, Claire said. Wear a suit. At 7:12, Ethan entered wearing the same charcoal suit he had owned since before Sophie started kindergarten. It fit well enough, though the cuffs showed their age. Claire noticed none of that until she noticed other people noticing. Near the bar, Senior Vice President Grant Holloway looked Ethan over. Facility staff are using the guest entrance now. Ethan met his eyes calmly. Only when invited. Grant gave a thin smile. Interesting. Claire approached before Ethan could say more. I invited him. Grant's expression shifted. Of course. Claire expected Ethan to enjoy the correction. He did not. He simply thanked a server who handed him sparkling water. Later, another executive mistook Ethan for someone assigned to check the lighting and asked him to adjust a fixture near the stage. Ethan looked up at it, then at the man. It is already positioned correctly. The executive laughed awkwardly. Right? Sorry. I assume. People do. Claire stepped closer. Ethan, you do not have to tolerate that. He looked around the ballroom at the expensive suits, polished shoes, and carefully guarded reputations. It is all right. It is not. Ethan's voice remained gentle. Claire, a title tells you what someone does. It does not tell you who they are. The executive beside them stopped smiling. Claire said nothing. Ethan had not defended himself by making the other man smaller. He had simply refused to become smaller himself. That was the strange power of dignity. It did not demand a room's respect. It revealed who already understood respect and who did not. An hour later, Claire saw Ethan sitting alone near the windows while couples moved toward the dance floor. His wedding ring caught the amber light when he lifted his glass. She remembered Rachel's chair. She remembered Sophie asking her not to keep him late. And as Claire crossed the ballroom toward him, she realized the question forming in her heart was no longer curiosity. It was personal. Claire crossed the ballroom slowly, passing donors who greeted her by name and executives who tried to catch her attention, but for once she did not stop. Ethan sat beside the windows with Chicago glowing beneath him, the city spread across the darkness in thousands of white and amber lights. When Claire reached the table, he looked up. "Escaping your own party?" he asked. "For 5 minutes. That sounds expensive." She smiled and took the empty chair beside him. "You are not dancing. Neither are you." "I am working." "That is what people say when they do not want to dance." Claire laughed softly. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The jazz trio shifted into a slower song. Beyond the glass, headlights moved along the streets 40 floors below like tiny streams of light. Claire had spent most of her adult life in rooms like this, surrounded by people who wanted introductions, contracts, promotions, access, something. Sitting beside Ethan felt different because he wanted nothing from her. That should have made the silence easier. Instead, it made honesty harder. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. Ethan turned his glass between his hands. "You can ask." Claire glanced at his wedding ring. "Why do you still wear it?" Ethan followed her gaze. "Habit, partly. And the other part? Respect." He looked toward the dance floor. "Rachel was my wife. Taking off a ring does not change that she existed." Claire nodded. "But you said you think about starting again." "Sometimes." "Then why do you keep everyone so far away?" Ethan became still. Claire immediately softened her voice. "I am sorry. That sounded more judgmental than I meant." "No, it is fair." He looked at her. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Ethan rested his hands on the table. "When Rachel died, people kept telling me I was young enough to rebuild my life. They meant well, but they talked about my life as if Sophie was not standing right beside me." Claire listened. "For me, dating would mean coffee, dinner, maybe disappointment. For Sophie, it would mean letting someone into the space where her mother used to be." His voice stayed calm, but every word carried weight. "She has already learned that loving someone does not guarantee they get to stay." Claire lowered her eyes. "So you are protecting her?" "I am trying to, even if it means being lonely." Ethan looked through the glass at the city. "Loneliness is uncomfortable. A child's trust is fragile." Claire said nothing. Ethan continued, quieter now. "I can handle coming home after Sophie is asleep and hearing nothing but the refrigerator humming. I can handle making coffee for one. I can handle sitting at events like this while everyone else has someone beside them." He turned toward her. "What I cannot do is bring someone into my daughter's heart because I am tired of being alone, then ask Sophie to understand if that person decides our life is too complicated." Claire felt her practiced composure disappear. "You really think that far ahead?" "I am her father. I have to." The music continued around them, but Claire barely heard it. Ethan was not afraid of love. He was afraid of treating love casually. And suddenly Claire understood why wealth, beauty, status, and charm would never impress him enough. He was not looking for someone who could make his life easier. He was waiting for someone whose presence would make Sophie's heart safer. Claire had entered the conversation believing Ethan was the lonely one. By the time the song ended, she realized she had spent years surrounded by people and had never once asked herself whether anyone trusted her to stay. For the next 4 days, Claire tried to solve Ethan's problem the way she had solved every difficult problem in her adult life, with resources. By Wednesday morning, she had reviewed his employment file, discovered he had turned down 2 management track opportunities because the hours conflicted with Sophie's schedule, and learned that his salary left little room beyond rent, groceries, school expenses, and the careful savings account he contributed to every month. Claire told herself she was helping. At 3 that afternoon, she asked Ethan to come to her office on the 38th floor. He arrived in his work uniform, carrying the quiet caution of a man who rarely entered executive offices unless something had broken. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No." Claire slid a folder across her desk. I want to offer you a promotion. Ethan opened it. Facilities operations manager. Higher salary. Better benefits. Claire watched his eyes move across the page. That is a significant raise, he said. You earned it. The position requires evenings. We can make the schedule flexible. Ethan looked at her. Claire. She hesitated, then opened another folder. There is more. Bennett Hospitality has partnerships with several private schools. Sophie could receive tuition assistance. I also know your commute is nearly 40 minutes. We have corporate housing closer to downtown. Ethan slowly closed the first folder. You looked into my life. I looked for ways to make it easier. Why? The question was not angry. That made it harder. Claire stood behind her desk, surrounded by glass, steel, and a view of Chicago that had once made her feel powerful. Because you carry everything yourself. That does not mean I want someone else to carry it for me. I am not saying you cannot handle your life. Then what are you saying? Claire searched for the right words. I am saying you should not have to struggle when I can help. Ethan looked toward the windows. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the heating system. Sophie likes her school, he said. Her best friend lives 3 houses away. Mrs. Alvarez across the street watches her when I get stuck at work. On Sundays, we walk 6 blocks to the same diner Rachel used to love. Claire's expression softened. I did not know. That is the point. Ethan placed both folders on the desk. You saw what my life costs. You did not see what it is worth. Claire went still. I was trying to do something kind. I know. His voice carried no accusation, only grace. And I am grateful. But Sophie does not need a richer life, Claire. She needs people who do not leave. The words settled between them. Claire had approved hotel purchases larger than Ethan would earn in decades. She could change salaries with a signature, arrange tuition with a telephone call, and move families across the city with corporate housing. Yet none of those things answered what Ethan had actually told her. I thought helping meant fixing something, she said quietly. Ethan's face softened. Sometimes helping means sitting beside something you cannot fix. Claire lowered her eyes. For the first time, she understood why Ethan's dignity had drawn her toward him. He had never wanted access to her world. He wanted someone willing to respect his. Ethan turned toward the door, then stopped. The promotion is generous. But if you ever want to have grilled cheese with Sophie, you do not need a folder. Claire looked up. Ethan gave her a small smile. You just need to show up. Then he left, and Claire remained alone in the largest office in the building, staring at 2 unopened doors money could create and 1 small door it could never unlock for her. Claire showed up the following Tuesday carrying bread, cheddar cheese, and a bakery box Sophie had not asked for but immediately approved. There was no driver waiting outside, no assistant checking her schedule, and no expensive gift. Hidden in the car, Ethan opened the door of his modest brick house and looked at the grocery bag in her hand. You know I already have cheese. I panicked. You run a company with thousands of employees. None of them have ever judged my grilled cheese. From behind Ethan, Sophie called, I will. Claire laughed, and Ethan stepped aside. That first dinner lasted 90 minutes. Claire burned 1 sandwich. Sophie declared Ethan's better. Nobody discussed hotel revenue, promotions, private schools, or corporate housing. They talked about Sophie's science project, the Chicago Cubs, and whether tomato soup belonged with grilled cheese. Claire left before 8 because Sophie had school the next morning. The following Tuesday, she returned. Then another Tuesday came, and another. Weeks became months, not through promises, but through repetition. Claire attended Sophie's school recital and sat in the 3rd row without telling anyone who she was. She helped decorate a cardboard solar system at the kitchen table. She learned that Ethan took his coffee black, that Sophie hated peas, and that Rachel's old chair still stood near the living room window with a folded blanket across its back. Claire never asked Ethan to move it. That mattered more than he said. One cold evening in early December, Ethan came home from work with a fever and insisted he was fine. Claire brought soup, checked Sophie's homework, and cleaned the kitchen while Ethan rested upstairs. You do not have to stay, he told her. Claire looked at him from the doorway. I know. Then she stayed anyway. By February, Sophie stopped asking whether Claire was coming on Tuesdays. She simply set 3 plates on the table. Ethan noticed. He noticed other things too. Sophie no longer watched the window when Claire was 5 minutes late. She no longer became quiet when Claire mentioned a business trip. Trust had arrived so gradually that nobody could name the day it entered the house. One Sunday afternoon, snow covered the sidewalks outside while Claire and Sophie sat together on the couch watching an old animated movie. Ethan stepped into the living room, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, and stopped. Sophie was asleep, curled beneath a blanket, her head resting against Claire's shoulder. Claire looked up and whispered, "What?" Ethan did not answer immediately. The room was warm. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Rachel's chair stood quietly by the window, no longer an empty place at the dinner table, but still part of the home. Ethan set the mugs down. She does not fall asleep around people she thinks will leave. Claire looked at Sophie, then back at him. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. I never asked her to trust me. That is probably why she does. Claire swallowed. I cannot promise that life will never change. Ethan nodded. I would not believe anyone who did. But I can promise I will not disappear because things get complicated. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he sat beside them and held out his hand. Claire placed hers in it. There was no applause, no grand announcement, no miracle anyone outside that small house would have noticed. Just a father, a daughter, and a woman who had finally learned that love was not proven by what you could provide. It was proven by what you were willing to protect, what you were willing to respect, and how quietly, faithfully, you chose to stay.